Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for a very, very special panel brought to us by Dr. Beverly Greene, who is also a member of our board. And we're very grateful to her and to the panelists for providing this panel discussion, so important, threading needles in the dark, wearing gloves, how mothers of Black children have the talk, then walk the walk. I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Marlene Watson, who is the Ackerman Institute's Director of Training. She's also the former chair of the Couple and Family Therapy Department and Associate Professor Emerita in the Department of Counseling and Family Therapy at Drexel University in Philadelphia. Dr. Watson?
Thank you very much. It is indeed an honor for me to be here tonight, and I will introduce our esteemed moderator, Dr. Beverly Greene. But before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge the people who have worked behind the scenes. That's Shauna, Jamie, Brenda, and Melissa. We are truly delighted to have this important and timely event. And so questions and answers, we ask that you hold them until the end and that you use the Q&A feature for any questions that you may have. I will assist in providing the questions to the panelists at the end. So that's what we ask that you do. And now it is really a great honor to introduce Dr. Beverly Greene, who is a board-certified clinical psychologist and professor of psychology at St. John's University. Dr. Greene is also a fellow of the American Psychological Association and the Academy of Clinical Psychology. Dr. Greene has over 100 publications, 12 of which received national awards. And not only that, but she also has 40 national awards and 2 APA presidential citations for her work. And if you haven't seen it, I am really thrilled to say that Dr. Greene is featured on the Mental Health America website as one of the pioneers, Black pioneers in mental health. I happen to have seen the list, and I think that anybody who hasn't might want to look at it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Greene.
Well, thank you, Marlene. Yeah, I had to look at the list twice because I didn't believe it. I am pleased to present our panelists, and I'm also very grateful they've taken the time to come and be here with us this evening, because I know they're all exceedingly busy people. I will introduce them. Christina Paisley Bailey is the Director of Administration for the School of Arts and Sciences and the Dean's Office, and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Administration Representative for the School of Arts and Science at Rutgers University. She's currently at work on a text, Intentional Parenting, Raising Woke Black Children in Turbulent Times. And she is the wife of a Black law enforcement officer and the mother of a daughter and 2 sons, ranging in age from 5 to 16. Dr. Natalie Byfield is a professor in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at St. John's University. Her overall research focuses on the role of language in society and how the powerful and those with less influence use language to shape their world. It explores media in society, cultural values, social theory, and the co-determined nature of race, gender, and class formations. She is the founding director of the Institute for Critical Race and Ethnic Studies at St. John's. Prior to her work at St. John's, in her previous life, she spent close to a decade working as a journalist in New York City, where her work appeared in Time Magazine, The Daily News, The American Lawyer, The New York Law Journal, and New York Woman. Dr. Byfield covered the Central Park 5 story for the New York Daily News and is the author of Savage Portrayals, Race, Media, and the Central Park Jogger Story. She's also the mother of 2 sons. Dr. Manushi Castagnol is an associate clinical professor in clinical health professions and clinical specialist for cardiovascular pharmacotherapy at Nassau University Medical Center, as well as the executive director of the Academic Center for Equity and Inclusion at St. John's University. She also serves as Assistant Dean for Community Engagement, Equity, and Belonging in the College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences at St. John's. She is also Assistant Director of the Urban Institute in the College of Pharmacy and Health Sciences. And in her spare time, God, for her outstanding work in reducing racial and ethnic disparities in healthcare, the American Society of Health System Pharmacists and the Association of Black Health System Pharmacists awarded her its 2022 Annual Leadership Award. From 2012 to 2017, she served as program coordinator of Changing Faces of Pharmacy student enrichment programs, an educational outreach program to introduce underrepresented minority high school populations to the pharmacy profession. A past president of the Association of Health System Pharmacists, she maintains her clinical practice in the telemetry unit of Nassau University Medical Center. She is the mother of a son. Dr. Shauna K. Denham-Wilkes is a clinical psychologist and the chief experience officer at the New York City Health and Hospitals Kings County Hospital Medical Center, a level 1 trauma center and safety net hospital with the 14th busiest emergency department in the United States. An executive leader, she directs the patient experience strategy and oversees workforce engagements activities around joy in work and person-centered care. Educated at New York University and St. John's University, she maintains multifaceted responsibilities that include roles as a researcher, adjunct professor, corporate wellness coach, and inspirational speaker. She has a passion for mentoring and for her work as a community advocate to end the stigma associated with mental health treatment. She's a mother of a very young son. Sharon Marshall is an associate professor at St. John's University in the Institute for Core Studies, where she is the coordinator of the first-year writing program. She's an associate of the Institute for Writing and Thinking at Bard College, where she leads writing pedagogy workshops for teachers and writing workshops for high school students, which we sorely need. She's the director of Inclusive Campus Climate and Communication within the Academic Center for Equity and Inclusion at St. John's University and serves on the St. John's College Dean's Anti-Racism Task Force and the ICS Anti-Racism Action Committee. She is the mother of a grown son and daughter and 6 grandchildren. Dr. Michelle Fine is a City University of New York Distinguished Professor of Psychology, Deputy Executive Officer, Critical Social Personality Psychology, American Studies, Urban Education, and Women's Studies at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. The recipient of numerous awards and honorary doctorates, she is recipient of the prestigious Elizabeth Hurlock Beckman Award, established to honor faculty who inspire their students to make a difference in their communities. She is recognized as one of the country's leading social psychologists. She is the Jewish mother of 2 sons, one of whom is Black. Alicia Parker Reeves served as an officer in the New York City Police Department for 22 years. She was in the first class of a cohort of 6 female recruits to serve as police officers in New York City, and the first woman to receive a motorcycle license. She was assigned as the first woman on patrol in the 41st Precinct. Alicia was a detective in the Bronx and Manhattan sex crimes units and in the sex crimes analysis unit. She was the 3rd African-American woman to be promoted to the rank of lieutenant in the NYPD, commanding the personal security unit at the NYPD Intelligence Division, covering security for Mayor Dinkins and dignitaries visiting the city. She received the designation Lieutenant Commander of Detective Squad during that assignment and was the first African-American woman to attain that distinction. Following retirement from the NYPD, she became the Director of Security for the NBA and managed security for the WNBA and the National Basketball League. In 2022, she was hired as the first and founding senior director of security for ESPN Enterprises Worldwide. She's currently working with various organizations, providing service to many communities throughout the country. She's vice chair of the advisory board for the High School for Enterprise, Business, and Technology in Brooklyn, New York. She's the former co-chair and frequent panelist for Dedication to Community, Choose to Live, a not-for-profit organization that seeks to bring together police departments and the communities they serve. Alicia is the proud recipient of the prestigious Athena Award for her dedication to the advancement of women. She's a life member of Noble and a life member of the New York City Police Council of Retired Guardians, a graduate of New York University, where she was a Martin Luther King Scholar with a BA in psychology. She has a son, a daughter, and 5 grandchildren. And I think you should all give yourselves a hand. I want to begin by reading an essay, in part because that I've shared with this panel, in part because it was really the sort of genesis for putting this panel together. It's written by an emergency room doctor during the pandemic. And he writes, I've spent months fighting coronavirus in the ER. Police violence is what really scares me. His name is Dr. Darian Sutton Ramsey. I'm an emergency room medicine physician in New York City, one of the only Black physicians in the emergency department at my hospital. While many New Yorkers followed shelter-in-place orders, I've been called to work to help heal people affected by the coronavirus pandemic. I drive to work, and lately, compared to the typical New York City traffic, the roads are empty. You might think this is a relief for me, but it was the opposite. I may have a shorter commute, but I'm a Black man behind the wheel when law enforcement and the government have ordered us to stay home. Stay-at-home orders have been enforced much more harshly against Black people, and I'm aware that I'm very much a moving target. This is a feeling I've dealt with my entire life. When I was growing up, toy guns were never toys. Water guns weren't even a thing in my home. My mother wouldn't allow slingshots. And even if I made the figure of a gun with my hand, she would slap me so hard I'd forget what I was doing. Why does she care about this so much, I'd wonder, rubbing the pain out of the back of my head. I didn't even bother to try to figure it out. Adults had weird rules and we kids just had to go along with them. By the time I was a teenager, it started to come into relief. I started to realize that I was no longer cute, that my presence was being interpreted differently by the people around me, be it classmates, teachers, or parents of my friends. It was intangible, but it was heavy. It followed me like a shadow, but when I turned around to confront it, I couldn't see it for what it was. So I ignored it until I learned how to drive. It started to come into it until I learned how to drive. When you learn to drive, maybe you learn about parallel parking, yielding, and merging. When a Black mother teaches her son how to drive, there are more important lessons that come first. Eyes on the road, hands on the wheel. Don't move a thing. Say, yes, sir. No, sir. My first lesson of driving was about how to behave when, not if, I get pulled over by the police. But before that, my mom would beg, please don't get pulled over. Please, please be careful. I started to see her pleas for what they were. I realized when they pulled me over, they wouldn't see me the way my mother saw me. They would see something else. So I heeded my mother's warnings. I do everything I can to look essential. I don't change out of my scrubs after work, even though it means potentially contaminating my own car with the virus or bringing it into my home where my partner sleeps. I keep my white coat on because I know that it signals authority and respectability. I pin my doctor's badge to the top of my sleeve facing the driver's window so I won't have to search around and risk being shot when the officer asks for an ID. I place my essential information on my dashboard so I can slowly and cautiously reach for it without being interpreted as suspicious. I rehearse my tone of voice, the ease with which I speak, so I can calm their inevitable racism. As I write this, I'm mentally preparing myself for work today. Well, not work really, more like the drive home from work. Even in the midst of a pandemic, the actual work is the easy part. I've trained under some of the most prestigious emergency room doctors in the world and level 1 trauma centers that require knowledge about everything from diabetes to heart attacks to gunshot wounds. Now, I've led teams through the worst of a pandemic. I can do this part. It's the drive home I'm preparing for. New York City was under curfew, presumably to curb the impact of demonstrations. Demonstrations filled with tens of thousands of people marching for Black lives, my life. The curfew terrified me, not just because I know it cloaks further police brutality by making it harder for it to be seen and recorded. It also terrifies me for my patients, many of whom are Black and homeless. They not only have to fight the current pandemic, which has killed Black people at wildly disproportionate rates, but also the much more insidious pandemic of racism. But I'm also terrified for my own safety. I'm an ER doctor operating on a 24-hour schedule, driving to and from work at all times of the day or night. Tomorrow's shift starts at 4 p.m. and ends at midnight, which means I'll be driving at 1 in the morning. How will I look to them with their batons and riot gear? What will happen to me? And more important, how do I even explain this to people I work with who can passively ignore my scheduled shift even after reading the news and making their own pledges of anti-racism? Maybe when I get in the car, I'll make sure that I use cruise control to be sure I don't accidentally speed. Maybe that will prevent my chances of being pulled over. Maybe I'll call my fiance for the drive home so that anything that happens can be recorded. Maybe I'll share my location the entire time with my twin brother, who's also a doctor in New York. Even though it's a pandemic, I will ditch my face mask while I drive home so I don't look suspicious to officers. I'd rather get COVID-19 than die of their brutality. I've already rehearsed it. If they move to put a knee on my neck, I would scream, "I am a doctor, I help people," before I lose consciousness. Maybe these things will keep me safe. Of course, if you've already seen this year, they won't. Breonna Taylor was an essential healthcare worker like me. She was killed by the police. For what exactly? Being in the wrong home? There was nothing George Floyd could have done to be better when Derek Chauvin was kneeling on his neck. This is to say nothing of the countless Black transgender people who are killed every year and whose names rarely echo through our streets with the same vigor. They should not have to somehow earn their safety. I answer a phone call from my mother this morning. It's a miracle that she ever sleeps, given all the worrying she has to do for her 3 Black sons. I remember rolling my eyes at her, telling her to calm down, but of course, I was simply too afraid to confront the fact that she was right. I'm a 32-year-old man, and my mother still asks for my work schedule. She does so as calmly as she can, knowing that if she expresses fear, she may upset me. Today, she called to gently repeat the same instructions she gave me when I was 16 years old and newly behind the wheel. She tells me to take care of myself, and then she makes a joke so she can hear my laughter. I tell her not to worry, but I know this is pointless. So instead, I tell her I love her, just in case these are the last words she'll ever hear me say. When I first read that, of course, there was no factual information there that I didn't already know. But I felt it was a profound statement about where we are. For therapists, as a trainer of therapists, I think everyone knows about the talk and that Black parents have this talk about what you do when you encounter the police. But the talk is not just a single conversation. It is an ongoing series of conversations, behavioral interventions, responses to incidents, role modeling, and instructions directed at keeping children safe. It's important for therapists to understand that many Black patients' personal challenges and dilemmas are often reflective of and embedded in a broader social phenomena over which they have no control. William Faulkner or Ernest Hemingway, I'm not sure which, said, "The past is not dead. It isn't even past." We sit 67 years after the lynching of Emmett Till, and many of these similar kinds of phenomena that people are obliged to respond to have intergenerational components and increase the weight of carrying the burden of what in some ways I felt was connected to mothers in a particular kind of way. And I thought about the mother, the first slave mother, and what could she tell her child about this world they had been born into and about their status in that world, how to teach them to survive in an overtly vicious climate committed to their dehumanization, and as we see currently, the adultification of Black children, without leaving them hopeless and demoralized, bitter and withdrawn, and teaching them how to separate the lies they're being told about themselves from the truth. That is a heavy burden. I thought about the responsibilities of Black parenthood and the responsibilities of parenthood in general. While I don't have children of my own, I am in my family known as #Auntie Out of Control. And so I know what it is to deeply, deeply love children in a family and to feel that sense of trepidation about what now when they go out into the world and they're looking more like adults. And we still are, despite being 67 years post Emmett Till, living in a world where Black children are dehumanized and are targets for both state-sponsored lynching as well as what one might call thug lynching, the likes of which is not unlike the Ku Klux Klan mobs that roamed the South looking for Black youth to lynch, selling tickets to those events and treating them like picnics or events to be celebrated. I remember once, Christina, we were talking about raising Black children, and you said, when I think about raising my children, it feels like I'm holding my breath and I'll breathe when I die. Mm-hmm. I want to first ask you and then ask the rest of the panel to respond to that. And if you wish, anything in Dr. Ramsey's essay.
Well, thank you for the Ackerman Institute for having all of us. I'm excited to be here with all of these amazing individuals on this panel. To respond, Dr. Greene, to your question, I don't have the capacity the agency because of my children and the climate that they're growing up in to not worry. My worry and my trepidation, my concerns, and my fears are forever consistent accompaniments. They're the feelings and thoughts that take up the space between the words I speak, the things I do. It's a weight, and it's a gradual weight, right? It shifts how my spine is calibrated. It shifts how I walk. It shifts how I think. It shifts how I sleep. And there's nothing that I can ever do to make that dissipate or go away. So metaphorically, it would be when I leave this earth that I would finally find rest in that way. Because just like the mother in the article, her son was 32. There will never not be a time, even after my children launch, where I will not care or be hypervigilant in my caring and in my concern and in my prayers for them, because of the world that they encounter, no matter how great they are or no matter how great they become.
Anyone else, please?
When I became a mother at the age of 40 for the first time, it's the only child I have. He's 4 years old currently. I became intimately connected to the experience that many first-time mothers have, where they are so sensorily hyper aware that they sometimes hear a baby crying and go to check, and the child is not crying at all. Many mothers have this experience. It's a typical experience where this perceptual disturbance occurs because our entire physiology is hyper attuned to the cues of the baby so as not to miss any. And so listening to Christina, listening to the article read again, it reminded me of that phase that for most mothers will over time and with the practice of knowing the cues and recognizing them will fade. But what do you do when that hyper awareness, that hyper arousal, that hypersensitivity to cues from your children's voice, from the experiences that they're going out in the world to experience and be involved in? What do you do if that persists for all of your lifetime, all of your mothering? I think that that's such an important thing to think about in terms of the lives of Black mothers, because that's going to impact even our neurobiology and our ability to think of our children in a way that does not have an undercurrent of what if every single time.
Can I just say that having the talk with Black parents having the talk with their children is something that may help them, may work for them. It's not a guarantee. I go, as Dr. Greene knows, when I speak to her class all the time, I go by the 20-20-60 theory when it comes to police officers. 20% are always going to do the right thing, 25% are never going to do the right thing, and the other 60 are going to sway with the wind. They're going to go whichever way they feel that their interests are. And if you encounter that 20% that's never going to do the right thing, being in your scrubs, showing them a police shield if you're Black, being in scrubs Black, showing a police shield if you're Black. My son gave him my business card, said, but my mom's a lieutenant in the police department. They said, I don't give an F who your mother is. So with those type of individuals, there's nothing that's going to help you, nothing.
Thank you. I was going to ask you, because I'm assuming that many people assume, well, if you're a police officer, and I might add, not just a police officer, but from a police family, that your father and uncle were ranking detectives, that both your siblings and an army of cousins are police officers, that even that doesn't matter. That you could not assume your children were safe from police.
No, as I just said, my son was not safe. On 2 occasions, he was accosted, and I use the word accosted because that's the true word to use. He was not just stopped and questioned. They put their hands on him. They threw him up against the car, against the wall. He hadn't done anything. And the only reason that he was actually saved, I mean, the first time he said, my mother's a lieutenant in the police department. They didn't care. You know, and the second time, and when that happened, I gave him my business card, and he pulled out the business card the second time, and that didn't work. The only reason he was saved on both occasions was because of people passing by. One woman, it was in the subway, and she said, I'm not leaving here until you let that young man go. I've been watching this whole thing and he did nothing. The other time it was he was standing at a bus stop and the police grabbed him, threw him up against the car, and he was right outside his place of business. And the proprietor from the business next door came out with her pen. It was before cell phones. I'm 72 years old, so this is a long time ago. She came out with her pen and her pad and started writing down, the plate number of the car, because they were plainclothes officers. And she said, I want your names and I want your shield number. She said, this young man just came out of work. I was watching this whole thing. Nothing happened. They just went through his backpack illegally, legal search. And when they didn't find anything, they jumped back in their cars and took off. And my son, I was ready to fight. And he said, Ma, he said, they know where I live. They know where I work. They know where I live. Please, let's just leave it. And he didn't want to pursue it. He didn't want to pursue it. So it doesn't matter whether, and I have a friend of mine who wrote a book. It's called How Not to Get Killed by the Police. And he wrote it for his son. And he wrote it after he had been stopped. He was an FBI agent. And he was up in Rhode Island visiting some friends. And he was walking through the street, and the police came over to him and grabbed him and put him on the curb, handcuffed him. And he knew not to go in his pocket for his credentials, but he told them the credentials are in my pocket. They pulled it out and they didn't believe he was an FBI agent. So he sat there for a couple of hours on the curb with people humiliated, with people walking by thinking he was some sort of a criminal. So, like I said, if you get that 20%, there's pretty much nothing you can do.
I was thinking about the comments, the letter that you read, Beverly, and then Christina and Shauna's comments, and putting that all together with what Alicia just said. And what's hitting me really hard at this moment is not only how it creates this hypervigilant, sort of hyper-attuned nature to us, but how it then forces us to interact with the rest of the world, because we're also thinking about all those behaviors that you're describing, Alicia. And it creates in us this type of surveillance, not only self-surveillance, but surveillance of our children. And so we are surveilling everything about them that the world might consider either a threat or not part of the normative understanding of what's accepted, and surveilling those things in a way that I think is not only detrimental to us, particularly in the context of Blackness, but detrimental to our own children. So it breeds this cycle of self-surveillance in us that we transfer also to our children. And it's of course in the interest of protecting them. And it's in the interest of getting them safely through their life's journey. But I was thinking of the mother in the letter, and the son recognizing that she didn't want to show him her fear. Mm-hmm. But nonetheless, it's this, so there's in the midst of our communications, even when we're not talking about it, it's still being communicated. And so it's this thing that hangs over us like a cloud almost. And so I don't have a solution to any of that, but it's an observation about how we are experiencing all of these things and how those experiences affect our interaction and what it might be doing and saying about Blackness and how we need to think about Blackness. And that's a pretty profound thing for me, because I do know that we all worry about reproducing the negative connotations about Blackness, but we're constantly being forced to, in a hypervigilant way, surveil the contours of Blackness that are considered negative. And so they stay primary, in a primary position in our minds, and creates this, for me, it's this kind of womanist way of thinking about Du Bois's, veil, because we're experiencing it in a way that we recognize how the world thinks about us. We recognize the ways in which we see ourselves and want to see our own identities. And then we're also not necessarily able to keep the distinction between the two the way Du Bois sort of proposed it, but we're forced to think about it in a different way, because we have to think about it in this way that might be life-saving to our children.
I think about and just taking in all of the comments that have in that letter, really just that was a hard letter to read, because my son's 23 years old and I was a young mother. And for me, thinking about this now is, I've taught my son that a freedom of movement, a freedom of space and time is not something that's available to him. And I would say how I experience him now, it's almost kind of what the author shared, was like, there's a rolling of eyes that's happening right now with him, that when I ask about, what time you're going to work, what time will you be back? And all of these things, he recognizes, okay, mom is just really nervous, but it's almost like he doesn't even want to connect to. What he said to me one time was that, I know you're worried about me, mom. I'm worried about me too. So what he's also having to do in that moment, and what the author shared there in that exchange, is not only does he have to worry about himself, he's got to worry about the person that he loves. Mm-hmm. I would say the most in his life, right? He's got to worry about me too. So he doesn't even get a chance to really kind of tune into and process his own experience, because he's worrying. So that worry is the legacy I've transferred. And I feel really helpless about that, because what am I to do? What am I to do?
Mm-hmm. And what does it mean? I'm sorry. Go on.
There's
go ahead.
There's a question for those panelists who are former law enforcement or have relatives in law enforcement. How do you sustain your being and hopefulness while carrying the soul wounds of participating in or being adjacent to this system? I struggle as a social worker in a program that partners with child welfare and policing agencies.
Maybe I can jump in here, and then give space to those of you who are in law enforcement. I feel so moved and privileged, Beverly, that you invited me to join this panel. And Demetrius, who's now in his mid-40s, Demetrius and I met on the grounds of the group home that he lived in when I taught at University of Pennsylvania. Group home was next door to my home. And it was a cold evening, and I was bringing over an ice cream cake for his birthday. And the director of the group home came out and screamed at me and said, don't you know you're not supposed, the boys aren't supposed to have a relationship with anybody in the neighborhood, and you're not supposed to have a relationship with them. And I believe Demetrius was sitting by the window listening to this. He was 9 at the time, and the ice cream was kind of dripping down my arm. So he and I met in the jaws of a state system designed presumably to protect him, where he experienced a lot of violence. And I guess I want to say that when I didn't know all that you all knew for maybe obvious reasons. But I feel like our relationship has always been mediated, whether now it's by police or child protective services haunting him in his own relationship with his own children. Just like the last speaker, and I'm sorry I don't know you all the way you know each other. I fear he worries as much about worrying me. And yet we have these intense conversations all the time, every time Child Protective Services shows up at his home. And he is just tagged with accusations that are unfair, but stick to him. And every time he's pulled over by a police officer, he kind of uses me the way the doctor in the story that you read, Bev, uses his white lab coat, that he gets me on the phone. So I know when I'm getting a call, often they're calls of crisis. And on the one hand, he doesn't want to worry me. And on the other hand, he's asking me to intervene in a world where most public systems have so systematically undermined who he feels he can be even now as a father. So mostly I just want to say I really appreciate being on this panel, but what it means to love a child who is vulnerable, and what it means to be asked to intervene on that vulnerability when we know we can't. It is, as you have all said so eloquently, and again, I obviously come at this really differently. It's the beautiful, painful weight of what it means to be in love with a child who is Black.
Thank you for that. And I would say, while we're focused on mothers, I want to be clear that that doesn't mean we think fathers are not important. I know whenever you focus on one thing, the assumption is you're saying to hell with somebody else. It's not hierarchical, but it's a different relationship. And the first time I read that piece, it moved me to tears because I could remember the reality that my mother didn't sleep as long as my brothers were out of the house, long after they were grown men, and sharing a house with my parents, that she overtly said, you come in here and tell me when you get home. And that she might be in bed, but she'd be awake and she would not go to sleep until she heard, I'm home, I'm okay. And my own awareness that one of my brothers lives in Essex County in New Jersey. And whenever I visit there, if he brings me home, I say to him, call me when you get home. And if I haven't heard within an hour, I'm calling him or I'm texting him. Where are you? Are you okay? And so I just say that to say that this affects other family members too. We're not just, that there is an enormity of the way that this affects Black families that I think goes largely unexamined and underappreciated, but it is, I think there's a particular weight on mothers. And as you're all talking about, you're protecting them And at some point, they're trying to protect you.
Yeah.
And there is that mutual sort of dance that's going on. Sharon, I've heard you talk about this in terms also of having grown children and grandchildren, and what happens for you when the phone rings.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the panel with all these distinguished folks, all of us who love Black children and really struggle with, well, basically like keeping them alive. I feel like that's what the struggle is. And that's why it can feel so, so heavy because, and so the phone call that I'm always worried about getting, even now that my son is, he will be 35 in a couple of weeks, is that call that he's been in an accident or something has happened. He struggled with learning disabilities throughout his schooling, and he's actually is still finishing up an undergraduate degree. He's one of these people who is very gifted in certain areas. He's a musician and has struggled in others. And so that, compounded with the fact that he is, I don't want to say mixed race, but, as a biracial has really given me many reasons to worry, and but partly because even though we've had the talk, many talks, because he lacks judgment sometimes in certain areas, I'm always wondering, is this the time when, he made the wrong decision, or, he thought somebody was like friendly and they weren't, or something like that. So yeah, I don't know if I'm answering the question, but the call is that even, the point is that even at this age, I still worry. And I worry about him in a way that is different from the way that I worry about my daughter. And everything that people have said, and especially in the article about, sort of, call me when you get there. I'm still doing that with him, and he lives in another state and he has his own children. Like when I speak to him on the phone, I'm like, where are you? And I have to really tone it down because I become this interrogator, but also, he is an adult, and, I fear that my fear infantilizes him. And, I know that he kind of has to, in certain terms, he has to face these challenges like on his own. He has to figure out a lot of this stuff on his own. And I think he feels like he has, because he's actually moved from New York and has lived in the South for like 12 years. And an interesting thing that he told me recently is that he said that when he was a teenager in New York City, he was often stopped by police officers, and he said just because they could, maybe that's the 20% that Alicia's talking about, just because they could prove who was in control and who owned the streets, and it's not you. So, and he said that since he's been in the South, he claims that the Southern police officers are more respectful. Now, I don't get that, but if that's his experience, I'm glad that that's so. But I don't know.
Can I respond to that, Sharon?
Yes.
I think that here in New York and other places, they're more overt about it. In the South, they're more covert about it. And that's what he's responding to, is the fact that they were more up in his face when he was in the North.
Mm.
Which is the reverse of what it has been historically. But perhaps because the South has been under such scrutiny, some people feel obliged to be a little more careful about how overt they are.
Well, it's been this way for quite a few decades, though, Dr. Greene. I mean, even you know, some of the most vicious attacks on children busing was in Boston, you know, and you know, it's not relegated to one section of the country, so to speak. You know, people think that lynching just happened in the South. There were lynchings in the North too, Minneapolis, New York. There were lynchings in northern cities. So,
apropos that, Natalie, you gave an interview to Afro Style magazine with Jason Maddox called "Our Boys, the Media, and the Manufacture of Dangerous Blackness." And you said, "Black boys have become targets. They are to be feared. This media-sanctioned, socially reinforced fear has made them completely vulnerable." I'd like first for you to respond to that, and then for other members of the panel to respond.
I think, and I appreciate you bringing that up. I think that when we add the media to the mix in terms of what we're talking about, the media has a tendency over different periods to portray Black boys, young Black people, because this happens to the young girls also, but young Black people, as a type of folk devil. You know, it's they create moral panics, and we cycle in and out of different types of moral panics, or different periods in which moral panics are being propagated by the media. And these moral panics involve not just a media representation of negativity or as a threat to everyone else, but it's the way in which they operate is that the media goes to all these other sources in officialdom. So they'll go to legislators, they'll go to church leaders, they'll go wherever it is they need to go to get other elements of mainstream authority to agree that the face of what particular problem they're trying to elevate, the face of the problem is someone Black. And or I should say it this way, they go through these different sources in officialdom to identify who they think is the face of the problem, the current problem they're trying to elevate. And oftentimes, typically, that person is not white, and oftentimes that person is Black and young and Black. And so they're represented as these threats. And so when I made that comment, I wasn't necessarily saying that it was new and we had never seen this before. I think we've been seeing this since the formation of colonial American formation of, the United States. We were just in another period in which there was another moral panic being propagated by the media when I made those comments. And I think we just go through those cycles. And there are different things that have been used by the media to elevate or to propagate amongst the public the idea of young Black people as threats, objects of fear. And I use the term objects seriously because it's completely dehumanizing. And some of the ways in which we've seen this operate most recently is the war on drugs. And we've seen it operate, we are oftentimes gangs get used, and so that becomes a part of what's being propagated to the public, as you know, and the ginning up of some kind of moral panic and ginning up of fear in the public. So we go through these different cycles, and that's more or less what I was referring to there. And I think we can look around and see sometimes when they may be about the business of creating another one.
Would anyone care to comment on Natalie's observation?
I want to, you know, where my son grew up, he grew up in, which is like, I'm just giving an example of like how that played out and what Natalie's talking about, how that played out in my real life, right? Is, you know, he grew up in an all-white space. I grew up in an all-white space as well, but I was a young girl growing up in the 70s and 80s in Canada. It operated differently than it operated for my young Black son in all-white space. And I really thought that I had the experience of being able to navigate all-white spaces because it's something I've always had to do, right? When I was younger. But what I recognized was I had no control of it, obviously. I had no control of how folks were going to see my son, how in spaces where he was being racially traumatized by his peers through, you know, jokes or making fun or bullying, that when he defended himself, they saw him as the bully. They saw him as the threat. So when he was simply just defending himself, and it was, well, no, he went too far. Meanwhile, he's fighting verbally, obviously, with his classmates and teachers in the space, allowing it to go on, not interrupting it. And what, even in a space where he's just simply trying to make his humanity visible, like what you're doing to me is hurting me, he was seen as a threat. So just me being human and asserting I am human is threatening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's how that worked out. And I had no devices. I didn't know how to fight that. I didn't know how to interrupt that. I literally moved to a district because of the schooling, and I had to take him out of that school, pay extra money that I did not have to put him in a parochial school where there were more Black kids and there were more Black teachers.
Mm-hmm.
I had to remove him because I didn't know what else to do. He shared one time, I just want to disappear. And how do you interrupt that? It feels like it feels like you're drowning and there's nothing else I could do. And what did I reinforce there? I said, okay, well, you know, we'll just remove you. So I actually told, in a space that actually belonged, I removed him because that was the only thing I could do. Reinforce that he didn't belong in that space. I reinforced that. Yeah.
And I think a lot of the concern in terms of what do you reinforce is that you don't want to sanction the gaslighting of your child's actual lived experience.
Mhm.
But at the same time, the fundamental role to keep him safe and to protect him leaves many times the choices are not that great. And so you're choosing from a menu where you know that what's the least rotten of these foods that we have to choke down, right? Mm-hmm. So to do that and to do it in a way that helps yourself as the parent understand that of these choices, I'm doing what I have to for what my child will have to deal with later on. And keeping, that goes back to what everyone's saying, is the talk is not just one talk, right? Because the experience is not just one time. And to make sure that we validate where others may gaslight, whether it's in the media, whether it's in schools or whatever other system, is the importance of that connection that we form with our children. That is a very powerful tool that many parents of Black children use to help to teach the lessons, to keep their children safe, and to also establish that what's happening to you, we believe you. It's real. It really happens, and it will really happen again. And so every time we have this talk to help to build another layer of the foundation that will equip them with the tools that they're going to need when we cannot be there.
You both been talking about something that I think resonates with my own experience of socialization from parents who were born and raised in the Deep South during America's apartheid period. And I think is something important for therapists to understand. And that is at least the message that I got was often, you can't do the same things that white kids are doing because the consequences for you will be different. And that's not fair. But there's this crap in the world that we inhabit that we didn't make, but it's there and we have to manage it. But that it's about managing other people's distortions of us rather than seeing ourselves as the problem. That it's about understanding, that these people can make problems for you, but you're not the problem. And that can be a helpful formulation for therapists who are working either with parents or with kids who are having these experiences. And the other was that you have to be strategic and use your brain, despite the fact that you may feel like your heart is going to explode with rage. And that is to think about the dilemma that you're facing and make choices. And that sometimes the choices are all kind of crappy choices. But it's better, you're being active when you make a choice that's the lesser of the evils. That's not passive. And what often happens, I have found with some Black kids, not kids, but young adults really, is the sense that if you don't do something, that you're just being passive. Thinking about what you're going to do and choosing the thing that's not going to get you killed is not passive. It's making the best of what is a bad situation, but also communicating that that bad situation isn't about you. That's about somebody else's distorted construction of you. And that you must understand that those are two very different things. And that you can't get an accurate definition of you from sources that are invested in undermining your success or are threatened by you. That's not where you look. But it was a kind of upbringing that I'm sure, because of their unique understanding of the viciousness of racism and all of the ways that it can take shape and all the absence of all of the choices that you might have at times. My father grew up in rural Mississippi, where there were very few choices. And just looking the wrong way could literally get you killed. But there was still this very strong sense of, okay, but sometimes you have to swallow it. That doesn't mean you're being passive. And it doesn't mean that they're right. It means you're making a choice to stay alive. And so I Because I think often therapists who are working with Black families need to understand how they can be helpful in these ways. And first, it's by, I think, hearing these stories and understanding all of those things that often go on beneath the surface, and again, are sort of unexplored. And sometimes I think therapists are reluctant to explore them for the same reasons that therapists are often reluctant to explore matters of race, but also because if you're working with people and you're asking them to dredge up these stories and to talk about the things that people are talking about today, it's not pretty. If one really deeply listens to Dr. Ramsey's essay, it's deeply painful. It's what Cornel West refers to as the grief in the grievances about racism. That people attend to the grievance and find it annoying, but they fail to hear the grief that is embedded in that is embedded in many of the stories that you're telling about having this most precious thing for you, which is your child, your children. And what can you say? What do you do? And often feeling inadequate in the face of what is a Herculean task that I think, again, in therapies can be put in perspective as a Herculean daunting task that no parent should have to do, but which, on the bright side, Black parents have been doing since that first slave mother. And we're still here. So somehow there is something in there, and there is something in the lessons of our past that are instructive about how to do that and raise strong, successful, mentally healthy children. But the effort and the angst that is a part of that cannot be underestimated and need to. I am reminded of something, Christina, that you said at our last meeting, when I think one of the questions I posed was about raising Black children and what that's like. And you said it's like juggling Fabergé eggs. They're precious, but they're fragile, and you can't drop one or it shatters. And that in some ways is part of the burden of Black parenthood. That you're always in this hostile environment, and that over different periods, the hostility can be exceedingly overt or covert, but that hostility is there, and that you're trying to prepare your child to know, all right, you're going to have to manage this. And this is not about you, but this is the way things are. This is what we're confronted with.
Correct. And I think one of the hardest things as a mother, juggling, and I want to go back just a second. When that egg shatters, it shatters into a trillion pieces. It is not as simple as a small fracture or 3 or 4 neatly defined pieces that I can easily, with glue, put back together with minimal fracture lines. You know, if that egg shatters, I'm sweeping it up and I'm discarding it. In this way in which I can never recreate the image that once existed. And anything that I can piece back together will look nothing like what was once there, because just that disruption shifts my children off their axis. It's a permanent scratch on the record. That song will never play the same again. Right? And I think that that's very important for the therapist listening to understand. And if I could go back to one of the things you were saying when you were recounting the story of your parents, you know, one of the things that we have to do for ourselves as mothers, but one of the things that we also have to do for our children to the best of our ability, or cultivate meaningful ways to release and dissipate some of what we go through on any given day. Because that is also an issue that will manifest itself in a multitude of ways, and none of them will be good, whether it is for the child or for the parent, father or mother, even though we're all mothers here today, right? And, you know, and there are ways to do that, and there are villages and cohorts to assist us. But I think it is also very important to acknowledge that, you know, we can't just have a conversation or a multitude of conversations without also allowing moments in time, wrinkles in time for, you know, I've heard Eddie Glaude say a holy hush, just a cathartic moment, not just for self-care, but for soul care. Because we have to do that methodically, consistently, as best as we can. When we have the time to, we have to stop and release. Because I think that is also the addition, the next chapter of what you were saying in that moment in time.
I would just like to say, it is so hard to raise healthy, mentally healthy children when you were raised in an environment that was not mentally helpful and you're broken yourself. And many of us, you know, going back generations from broken, even though there may be two parent families, they were broken families. They were families that were just not a positive environment for any child to be raised in. And then when you come from that, and then you find yourself in a relationship, you know, when you have children, then your spouse leaves because they can't, you know, tolerate you or whatever. And now you're left with young children who are with a broken individual who's now been left on their own and is trying to figure it out and is making a mess of everything. And I tell you the truth, I had so many friends who were in the same position I was in, the exact same position I was in. We used to talk all the time, especially about our boys, about our boys and how they had no male role models because they were single mothers, and it was shattering when we did everything we could. We had those boys in our hands. Those were Fabergé eggs, and we overdid it. We overprotected that Fabergé egg, and they can get shattered, not just physically, but, you know, emotionally. And my son and I have not spoken in 10 years, and I'm devastated by it, but I had to give it up, you know. And he doesn't speak to his children, you know. I'm trying to, you know, to parent his children. So it's a sad situation when that brokenness just keeps getting passed on and on and on and on. It's very, very sad thing.
And one of the things I want to add is, you know, when you were talking, I was thinking, and why aren't most Black families like that? Because if you think about the history of the conditions that Black families have been subjected to, from the point at which I forget who was being interviewed about this. It wasn't Denzel Washington, but that's, for some reason, that's who's coming to mind, who was talking about saying, you know, imagine what that was like. I can't imagine somebody coming and taking one of my children and selling them or giving them away, and I never see them again. And that was the lot in life for Black people for as long as they were slaves, that our children were not our own, our families were constantly disrupted. And then even in the aftermath of that, when all of the legal forms of slavery were put in place in terms of Jim Crow and other kinds of barriers, there was still, in terms of public policy, all kinds of institutional measures put in place that were just decimating to Black families. And I often think of therapy as in part, what therapy does is reframe reality and ask both sides of the question. I understand the fractures in Black families. What surprises me is why more are not fractured, why more are not dysfunctional, because what has been done to us supports dysfunction and it supports fracture. It doesn't support wholeness. It doesn't support the kind of loving, intentional bonds that we see in our families. And that's important for therapists to mind when working with Black folks, to ask questions about what did our elders do when they were confronted with nonsense that I can't even imagine. Because just the little that I was exposed to would have driven me mad. I just, it's like, how I have often asked elders in my family, how did you live in that nonsense and not lose your damn mind or kill somebody? How did you do that? And because I was fortunate enough to have elders who lived well up into their 90s, I could have those conversations. And when you're talking to people who've been around almost 100 years, they've seen a lot. And when we only see things in the present, sometimes we can get locked into a level of dismay that the past can help us to reframe. And certainly in therapy, we are jumping between the past and the present and looking towards the future all the time. But what they most often said was, you never know what's going to be. The message was, the future hasn't been written. Nobody's had the last word on this, and you have to keep moving forward. Or as one of my aunts would say, well, you can't just lay down and die. You have to live. You have a life. You have to live. You have to keep moving forward. And that there are in our families those kinds of things that I think are more, raise the question more, well, where did they learn how to do that? Where did slaves who were hopeful, why were they hopeful? People who have maintained their dignity in the midst of indignities, who maintain hope in the face of hopelessness. Those are important things for mental health professionals to understand, because that can help us to help people who perhaps didn't have that in their past, but can create it in the present. And can help to put in perspective, look at what you're doing, but look at what you're up against. And don't be so hard on yourself.
I was going to add sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to add also, for the therapist, when you're really looking at the person beyond the identified issue or problem that brings them to you, and to think about them as a whole person that has constructed a life beyond just what brings them to you. Also to think historically about the places where Black people do create agency and create joy and create community and therapeutically deal and process, maybe not in terms of psychotherapy, but in terms of spaces like the church or spaces like centers where where music is being created and art is being created, and where family gatherings, when you think about all the social media lingo about inviting people to the cookout, because the cookout is a very, very special environment. And without even describing it, you mentioned the cookout, and it automatically images and sounds and smells and tastes start to come to the minds of people who understand what the cookout is about. So to understand those spaces of safety that Black people create, and where our children have the agency of their bodies and freedom of movement, and the village is there and everyone's helping to contribute. My mom is one of 12, my father is one of 14. I have 12 parents and 14 parents, and then multiples of that. And those spaces that imbue in our children, in our generations, help to mitigate some of what could be more dysfunction, as you mentioned, Dr. Greene, where the situations, the circumstances, and the systems should translate into just a landscape of shattered Fabergé eggs. And so when we listen to what Alicia's pain is and what she's experiencing and how she's reparenting herself and her grandchildren, and we think about what Christina mentioned and everything else that's been discussed, you'll see a lot of head nodding in these little squares, right? Because we are using these spaces to talk about how we create these lives that then go on to create more lives. So I think for the therapist to think about where in your clients' lives are they finding value. Your role as the therapist is not the only place where therapeutic processes are happening, and that should not be the conceit, but to really understand and delve and create the space for that discussion of where therapeutic processes are happening, because they're happening more than in just that space.
Mhm.
I think in part of my life experiences, I have seen my behaviors pathologized, the very behaviors that we've been talking about today, in terms of the worry or in terms of the hypervigilance. I've seen that pathologized in Black women, you know, and I find a space like this very, very nurturing for me, because it removes the stigma of those behaviors as somehow a type of neuroses, and in fact acknowledges it as a thing, you know, a real thing, a part of our experiences, and an element of our experiences that have to be acknowledged as the labor we are doing as Black parents or Black mothers and mothers of Black children. It is a part of our labor. It's a part of the work. And sometimes, you know, there's so many things that we're doing that, you know, make us tired. And when the things that we're doing that make us tired are pathologized or denied as really existing, then it also puts us in a terrible space, because it's denying an element of our lives that we know is real, but we can't oftentimes get the type of or level of acknowledgement that we need as we do this work, because without the acknowledgement, we don't get the support.
Well, I think what you're both saying is extremely important, particularly around this notion of pathologizing responses of Black people to real social phenomena, that our behavior gets talked about in this decontextualized kind of fashion, particularly in mental health settings, as if somehow when you walk into the therapy door, all the stuff that you have to manage in life remains outside. Everything that's associated with the sociocultural environment, somehow that's held in abeyance. Well, that becomes part of what you have to interact with all the time. And it's in some ways about the gaslighting of colorblindness. That sort of, we don't need to, well, you know, we're pathologizing people when we're talking about people responding to pathological social conditions and having to try to figure out how to adaptively respond to what is social pathology and not individual pathology. But it's easier to pathologize people, especially if And I certainly understand how this can get generated in a therapist. If you think if you're going to start talking about social conditions, well, I can't do anything about that. So all I can talk about is changing the person. Well, maybe you need to help the person understand what it is they're confronting all the time. And they might feel differently about what they're doing. And they might be able to give themselves a break. Because when people are managing social pathologies, it becomes rote. I think probably most Black folks, whenever we're going someplace or doing something, some part of you is anticipating what your Blackness has the capacity to elicit in whoever and wherever you are, and what you might have to do about that. And that is sometimes more conscious than others, but there's always that dilemma. And it can be as banal as when you walk into a high-end store, or as life-threatening as when you or a member of your family is stopped by the police, and in all manner in between. But that part of our socialization, and I think, Natalie, you referred to it as this self-surveillance and scrutiny, is this sense of a skill that's about anticipatory intelligence around, okay, what nonsense am I going to elicit here around that? And what am I going to do about it? And do I choose to do anything about it at this moment, or just let it go? Or is it something I have to respond to? And if I'm going to respond to it, who exactly am I responding to? What's the outcome that I want to see? Am I apt to get that in the nature of this situation, or from the person I'm looking to get it from? And is it worth my time on this given day when I have 50 million other things to think about? And just in that, if you just think about microaggressions and what those encounters are like, they are all psychically draining. And so when people are talking about feeling tired, they have reason to be tired, because there's all of that stuff goes on in the decisions that you make at any given time about, okay, what you're going to do about that, or are you going to do anything? Because doing nothing sometimes has a cost as well. But those are all things that can be addressed in therapy, and used to help support people who are trying to manage this social pathology that is racism, that is still with us despite what has changed. Many things have remained the same. Alicia, were you going to say something?
No, I was just typing. Someone just asked about policing in the suburbs as opposed to policing in the cities. And my answer was, it's not, there's no difference. You know, policing, certain people gravitate to policing because of the power structure of it. And it's the same in the cities or in the suburbs. It's all the same. That was all I was.
Beth, can I just add a layer to the social context? I do a lot of work in prisons and in schools, and so many behaviors are now criminalized that are just and racially criminalized. So I think in New Jersey, yesterday or today, 2 young men were picked up by the police, right? And the young Black man was handcuffed and thrown to the ground, and the white boy was told to kind of go off or sit on a couch, and you could hear on the radio the indignity of the young African-American kid who not only gets assaulted by the police, but watches his white friend get treated with a privilege that invites him to walk away. And I guess when you were talking earlier, Bev, about children being taken away historically, I feel like for lots of low-income families, that's still a constant threat. During COVID, when young mothers of color had kids at home, had to go to work, I was working with the New York Civil Liberties Union because Child Protective Services was being called in on those mothers. So the kind of impossible choices we've been talking about, they now get criminalized. And when kids act out from their brokenness or trauma, or because someone's making their life crazy in school, if they're Black, they're likely to be criminalized, whether it's Child Protective Services or foster care or schools or policing. The kind of layer of criminalizing children is extraordinarily high these days. And so when we advocate as parents, we're fighting kind of doubled systems and trying to protect a child. Whoever said you overprotected, I don't know. It's kind of impossible to figure out what the right balance is, because there are so many systems allied against Black children. And I see mothers just throwing your bodies down to try to protect your babies. I don't know if that's overprotection or what it means to be a parent in a vicious world. Bev, you know that in 1968, Martin Luther King gave a talk at the American Psychological Association calling for, what was a creative maladjustment? He was saying, as Black people, we cannot adjust to this society. You psychologists have to stop telling us to adjust to a society that's trying to make us crazy and kill us. And I feel like therapists who are listening to this today need to be thinking about, what are we asking people to make sense of? What are we asking them to adjust to? And how are we complicit in criminalizing behaviors that are that are just trying to survive and make sense in a world that's pitted against particularly low-income families, but families of color and children of color. I live in Montclair, New Jersey. The special ed disparities, the suspension disparities, kids get picked up for drug deals, the drug dealer goes to jail, the drug buyer goes to the family psychiatrist. All the ways those dynamics get racialized and criminalized. So yeah, I feel like therapists need to think about what systems we are complicit in.
And I agree.
I want to shape Michelle's thought in a different context around fatigue. And I want to give an example. So the incident that Michelle is talking about happened at a mall. That was not just, after hours, late at night, early in the morning. That was at a mall. And so when you have a Black woman who comes to sit in your office and she says, I'm exhausted, that word means something different, because for everything, Dr. Greene, that you just talked about, you have to extrapolate to its lowest common denominator. We're doing that every minute of every day over every decision, i.e., can my son go to the mall?
Yeah, yeah.
Not even major things, right? So I have a 16-year-old. I always knew that was plausible, but this just amplifies it for me, because the mall that happened in is less than 30 minutes away from where I live. So it's possible that he would want to go there. But all that you talked about, Dr. Greene, and taking something, extrapolating information and the what ifs or the if then statements, I have to do about something as simple as going to the mall. So I'm worrying from the moment he leaves the house to get on the bus, and are you on the bus? And did you make it to school? Just send me an emoji. And if you don't want to send me an emoji, can you just please just let me track you? And then all the things I worry about for myself as a Black woman at work, while I'm worrying about my Black husband and my Black boy. And then he wants to go to the mall at the end of the day. So nomenclature and definitions sometimes are shaped differently. And when talking to clients of color, because the fatigue we're coming with is generational. And then you overlay a pandemic and the fatigue that presents us with too. So when I say I'm exhausted, I'm saying a multitude of things. And I think that also goes back to what Natalie was saying, and I'll keep my comment short, This is why spaces like this are cathartic for us. It's because number one, we're seen and validated, but we all share this regardless of where we are.
Mhm.
And I don't have to explain myself here. I don't have to do the work to validate and force you to believe that what I'm saying is not what we like to call an alternative fact, an alternate reality.
Mhm.
All the women here understand me in a way that I don't have to create the words or find words that are close enough or good enough, because definitions and nomenclature really doesn't exist. So I just wanted to shape that a little differently just to provide some context. I hope that was okay.
Can I just?
I was going to say that you're talking about, again, all of that other layer of all that other stuff that goes unexplored and underestimated, but is a part of the day-to-day, that becomes so much a part of the day-to-day that people don't even recognize that that's part of what they're doing, that that's an ongoing task, and that that's on top of, I mean, I think being a parent is the hardest job anybody would ever have. And, you know, I'm reminded of the analogy of having a child is like having your heart outside of your body, walking around. And it's your job to take care of and protect it. But there are all of these things that Black parents have to do on top of the normative stuff in circumstances that they can't control, and that range from, again, the apparently benign. I mean, when you use the term microaggressions, I have colleagues who said there's nothing micro about microaggressions. They're still aggressions. You're just not dead at the end of it. But you know, I hope you don't mind if I share a story that you shared with me, Christina, about when you and your husband were thinking about getting a new vehicle. And you went out and looked at some things and thought, well, this is a time when maybe we can get something a little bit nicer. And you both looked at each other and said, wait a minute, our son's gonna have to drive this car. We can't get a car this nice. He'll be getting stopped all the time. And, you know, that was another one of those moments when I thought, does it occur to people that Black parents have to think about something that in some ways trivial? That you can't get something that looks too nice because the assumption will be if he's in it, he stole it.
Mm-hmm.
And it will bring him to the attention of folks who could kill him.
Mhm.
And that's just buying a car. That's, you know, that's not even ostensibly something really dangerous. But that what is it? Where do people find the room and the space to hold all of that?
I'll
Because
further
you
that.
also have to work and live and do other things.
I'll further that example. So my son is 16. He just passed his written test. And so, you know, we're looking and doing that whole process. And I have a colleague whose son is the same age, maybe a little bit older, and actually started driving. And for 2.5 seconds, I caught myself envying her joy that he was entering this next phase.
Mhm.
I envied her capacity to smile and be happy because he was just chronologically entering another phase. Because I'm fearful. I am worried. I almost can't complete the sentence without coming to tears because I'm exposing him to another layer that I can't protect him from. And God help me. Right? I don't even know where joy fits in to this moment in time for me.
Mhm.
I don't even know where I will find that. And I know, like I know my name, that the moment he drives off in my car, I'm going to run in the house and bawl and simultaneously pray. And just what from henceforth and forevermore, right? And that goes back to well, call me when you get there.
Yeah.
That's going to be integrated into the phrases that come out of my mouth. Call me when you get there. There is no joy to be had.
I'm reminded of the Aretha Franklin iconic song, Call Me the moment you get there. That wasn't just about romance. That in the lives of Black people, when a family member leaves you in our history, you don't know what's going to happen between the time they leave you and supposedly get to where they're going. And that message, at least in my experience, that when people separate, call me when you get home. Marlene, how are we doing on time? Should we continue?
It's 7:40. We have some questions. So how about you take those questions, and then if there's time left and there's something that you or the panelists want to say, that you can feel free to do that.
Okay.
Okay. One of the questions has to do with how can communities of color support each other in this aspect of parenting and having the talk. And as Natalie spoke about, interrupt cycles of intergenerational trauma. And this question prefaced it by talking about the pandemic and how many Asian American caregivers had described a similar exchange with their children to prepare them to survive hate.
Would anyone like to respond?
I just want to make sure that, how do I say that? I want to make sure that we understand, while related, that kind of racial trauma is distinct. And I think part of supporting each other is to recognize the ways in which racial trauma overlaps, and also the ways in which it might be distinct, and how we might experience that differently, and really see each other, right? I think that's really important, to actually see all parts of it and not assume that while they may be related and they may look the same from the outside, they might be experienced differently. And the level of sustained racialized trauma that might exist, the ways in which anti-Blackness exists in all of these communities, we just need to really have a conversation that doesn't dilute the experiences, but helps to amplify the experiences so that we can actually support each other and see each other in full view. That's what I would say here about that is, and I'll give an example of what I mean by that. So in the wake of George Floyd, there was so much activism on campus, having our conversations about anti-Blackness, about police violence being raised to the fore. And then, of course, during the pandemic, there was a slew of racial violence propagated. And of course, Asian American communities were targeted for that racial violence. And I would say that I was able to reach out to my colleagues and express, I'm in solidarity with you and I see what is being done and I'm here to support you and I understand. But the silence that I experienced from my Asian colleagues as it relates to the violence around George Floyd and his murder was stark. And so I think there was a question about this recently, about where it was posed in a very particular way around this concern about the racial violence that was experienced in the Asian American community. And it was the article that was like, well, how could the Black community be more supportive of the Asian community? And I think it's really important that we recognize that we need to understand and see each other and understand the legacy of violence that each community experiences, and see that. And then we'd be able to kind of support each other in that way. But it requires a truth telling about how sometimes the violence that Black people experience in some communities are viewed as, well, they put themselves in that position, versus the narrative I hear a lot about is in other communities is, well, they're pure victims, versus almost that the violence that Black folks experience is almost, they brought that on themselves, right? And so I need to really, I struggle with this a little bit in the way that it is posed. It's really important for us to recognize that how I experience allyship as a Black person. And I just want to surface that truth.
Anyone else? I'm reminded of something Cornel West said in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. He was being interviewed, and the discussion was about how simply unmoored Americans felt, that we could be attacked on our shores, that so many people could be killed in one fell swoop, and that some other country, that people could hate us so much that they would do this. And West was asked if he had any words about how Americans could overcome that feeling of devastation and that sense of not knowing what to do. And he said, well, they could learn something from Black people, because you understand, America has just been niggerized. To be niggerized is to be hated, unsafe, and unprotected. And that's what Black folks have been here for 400 years. And yet here they are still standing strong. So the question is, how did they do that? How did people with this intergenerational history of vicious discrimination and murder, basically, because lynchings are murder, are murders that are permitted. How did people do that and not be riddled with pathology? Black folks as a whole are not riddled with psychological pathology. But for me, I go back to the question of, and so why aren't we? Because Lord knows there's enough reason to be. But if we ask that question honestly, it can inform other communities about how to manage this social pathology, which is what now other communities are also experiencing. Natalie?
Yeah, I wanted to add to both your comments in response to this question, because if we don't deal in the truths, it's going to be difficult to address the problem. And as Manushka put out there, and Bev, your discussion of America being riddled with this social pathology, these two comments come together for me around the way the media has covered the attacks on Asians. I don't know if it's because I've watched New York City news or, metropolitan area news, but there's been a focus on the news that I've received, I'll put it that way, has identified oftentimes a Black person as the perpetrator of the violence against Asian Americans. And I must say that in in enough of these stories to catch my attention, I have noticed that the perpetrator, who is the person who's the suspect, has displayed what I thought were signs of mental illnesses. And I have wondered about the fact that, one, that's not discussed in the story, and the story represents the attacks on Asian Americans by Blacks as a normative thing.
Mhm.
And I've also wondered about the depths of the pathology against Asian Americans in this system by way of what was articulated under the Trump administration and then has continued, that creates the environment where people who are unstable act out in this way.
Mhm.
And so that's not what we get, and that's not the context that we get. What we get is Blacks attack Asian Americans, and shouldn't, these groups have a history of discrimination and violence against them, and look at what's happening here.
Mhm.
So it reads to me as this narrative of these Black people complain about being discriminated against and being violently attacked, and they do the same thing. That's what I read from the coverage. When I think there is a much deeper story under here that needs to unearth the truths that we've been discussing here, and also deal with the fact that there has been a consistent messaging happening in the culture, because it's a pathological culture around this that people who are unstable pick up on and act out with.
Mhm.
Can I, Dr. Green, just, in my opinion, violence of any kind is abhorrent, okay? Whether that's police violence against people in the Black community, or mentally ill people, Black people attacking Asians, or and when the pandemic came out, it was white people attacking Asians because of our former president saying, that they were responsible for this virus. I mean, it's this, we live in a violent society, a violent world. And I think violence of any type is abhorrent. But there are so many different reasons for the violence, and there are so many different answers to how we have to attack each one of those things. It's not one thing, and people keep putting it into a bucket of one thing. There's many, many different layers that's involved in violence. When our children join gangs and they're violent against other children, there are answers to that are not found in police reform movement. Do you know what I mean? There's so many different layers that we have to reform our mental health system in this country. We have to teach our children from the time they go into pre-K and 3K about empathy and conflict resolution. That should be something basic in elementary school. We have to hire police who are empathetic and screen them carefully to make sure that they don't have white supremacist backgrounds. There's so many different layers to solving these problems, and people just seem to just throw everything into one bucket, and it just is so short-sighted as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Another question is, in the context of racism and threat, how does your mothering differ as a function of your child's age?
That's an important question, and one I think some of you have already alluded to, in terms of, Christina, when you were talking about having a child who reaches that developmental milestone of getting a driver's license, and that being cause for celebration. Not exactly. But in it, for those of you who have young children or can remember things from when your children are young, how does it differ?
It oftentimes it'll differ depending on the institution that I have to deal with. And so when they're young, like with school, one of the most striking things to me about schools is that around the age of 9, Black kids get adultified. And so, so even within the institution, I have to think about how the institution responds to my kids. So I could see, they were cute. Lots of little kids are cute. But I could see just the wariness in the faces of some of the white female teachers dealing with my 9-year-old sons and seeing them already as, kind of a physical threat even. And they were not, some kids are really tall for their, nothing like that. It was just, you saw the change. And so for me, the age is definitely relevant, and it would change, but it would also depend on how the institution was dealing with that.
I want to add to that. Same with my son. And it did happen around, if I had to pinpoint the age, you're right, it did happen around like 8 or 9. But I think that for me, there was a bit of distance from that truth that I was able to hold on to for a bit. And it wasn't until I was at a doctor's office and I was walking in with my son, who's clearly a baby, right? Like physically, like he's a baby. And he was probably about 15 or 16 years old. And we're walking into like a urgent care center. And the doctor is, kind of addressing him directly. I'm just like, I'm standing right here. I'm here. And, and when he first walked in, he kind of gave this look like, that's strange, right? And strange, there was a strange or a look of confusion is what I would say. And, he kept directing the questions, and then he turned, my son was like, I don't know, you can ask my mom, right? Like she's right here. And he was like, that was your son? I thought he was, I thought he was an adult. And it just struck me, and fear. I cannot tell you the fear that started literally at the back of my neck and it rushed down my spine. I was physically afraid because that was the truth I had been denying myself for years. And he said it, and he said it so carelessly. He said it, I'm still so angry with this physician. He was so careless in sharing. Because I knew what that meant. I knew what that meant. I'm getting emotional just thinking about that moment. So I'm going to stop here.
Anyone else?
As a child and adolescent psychologist who thinks a lot about developmental age and milestones in my work, and then now connecting it to the reality of having a child, I recently was apologizing figuratively to all the parents I had helped previously, now that I understood how some of my interventions must have been received by them as, yeah, thanks, lady, but that's not going to work in real life. Because the textbook and reality often don't, walk hand in hand. But my 4-year-old, he's all about power. He's all about superheroes. He's all about, he's moved from the world of dinosaurs to the world of action figures. And he's like, every day he needs a little bit of power, and his no is a no. And there's no 2 ways about it. There's not even a hint of a yes. When he says no about this food that I'm trying to get him to eat, that's it. You know, he is not going to have anything but what he wants to have. And his no has so much power. And I love it. I respect it. I'm impressed by it, you know, and yet I think, is he going into a world where his no can be no and his yes can be yes? Am I preparing him for a world where developmentally he's going to have to understand that there's a disillusionment coming? So when I listen to my mothers who have walked the age of 4 before me and where they are, I'm sitting here and I am mentally taking notes, because it is important to consider how the developmental age of the child that you're dealing with and where they are in terms of milestones will impact the messages that that they will receive from us and the messages that they will give to us as well, right? So I think that the question about how do you parent in the context that we're discussing based on the child's age really really taps into something very, very important. I don't know if we have time to unpack, but I think that it does absolutely make a difference where the child is and what the child needs, and what their cognitive and emotional abilities are, because we're also speaking as if all our children are neurotypical as well. You know, I just want to just point that out as well. It's kind of a little bit of an assumption that might be there as well, that I just want to just press on just gently, you know, in terms of that. But yes, developmental appropriateness in the context of this ongoing talk is also very important for us to discuss. I really like this question.
Mhm. And it's, I think it depends on what's going on and what the child is bringing to you. Like most things, you try to explain things to children at their developmental level. And from my work with kids, sometimes you have to listen concretely to what they're asking you. You know, that when a child asked me, what's sex? And my hair stood on end, you know, why is a 5-year-old asking me about this? And fortunately, I shut up long enough to say, well, what do you mean? And it was about seeing the word sex on something that was asking about what's your gender. But it wasn't a question about what is sexual activity. It was a very concrete question. And I think often for kids, you have to think in terms of what are they asking you concretely, not what does that mean if an adult were asking, in order to respond to them appropriately. And even where race is concerned, that by the time kids are 5, they've figured out that they're a race, but they not necessarily what that means. And sometimes they're, I have children who are children of family and friends of different ethnic groups. And one of them was telling a story about her son, who is Jewish. It's a Jewish family. And they were talking about Martin Luther King or something at school. And he came home and he said, you know, they're talking about Black people at school today, and Martin Luther King and something else. And I don't think I like Black people. And his mother, who was horrified but didn't want to overreact, said, well, but of course you do. And named me and some other people that he knew. He says, you know, you love them and they're Black. And she said, he looked at her and said, no, they're not. Like, sort of, have you lost your mind? And she couldn't figure out, like, what is he talking about? You know, it's like, these are Black folks. And he goes and gets his crayons and comes back and says, now, Mom, this is Black, this is brown, this is white, this is pink. Bev isn't Black, she's brown. You need to learn your colors. And so, you know, sometimes you also have to be careful not to be responding to the thing that you're hoping that they're not asking, because that may well not be what they're asking. but each developmental period brings a different task. And I think, as Natalie was pointing out, when children reach a certain age, you're expected not to be so protective, except Black kids still warrant protection. And I think one of the challenges to mothers of Black children is, and what do you do when somebody's 35 years old and you're saying, no, you have to call me when you get home. And I need to know what your work schedule is. Because they're in a different reality. And what may be appropriate in a world where one doesn't have to think about those things. You know, I know, Christina, you have shared ways that you and your husband have a practice around when he leaves work. He tells you he's leaving work, and if he's going to stop any place in between, he has to call and tell you.
I would love to answer the question, but I want to be cognizant of time, Dr. Greene. Marlene, do you want to stop here, or I know we're over?
We are over, but I'm willing to stay if the panel would like to continue, and we still have participants on. So maybe we can extend it for 5-10 more minutes.
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I'm okay with it. I'm sorry, Dr. Greene, if you could just ask the question one more time.
Well, it was just that, you know, the way that this affects families is even with partners. Mm-hmm. You're waiting, you know, you've talked about realizing that when he leaves in the morning, your blood pressure was getting elevated. If he didn't walk in the door at about that time he's supposed to come home, your blood pressure is getting elevated again. And trying to figure out what that's about and realizing that that's connected to, did something happen? It's kind of like what Aaron was talking about when the phone rings. What could that be? And having to work out this arrangement by which he has to call you when he's about to come home. There's a particular route that he has to take. So if something happens, you know where to look. But those are the kinds of things that in our families are situated in a different social context.
So I'll answer the question very quickly, but I want to anchor it with an example. My husband really wanted to parent and co-parent intentionally. So because he's in law enforcement, he opted to go to the night shift to raise our daughter. So my daughter didn't go to daycare. She went right into school. And I thought, you know, there are great benefits to that. It was, she's maybe about 6 months old, and she was in like the little kangaroo pouch that you put on the front of you. They were just going to go maybe 5 blocks. He was going to get maybe a coffee at Dunkin' Donuts. Well, on his way back home, at a minimum of 2 police cars rolled up on him. And they tried to assault him with my baby in a kangaroo pouch. And he put his hands up and he said, I'm a law enforcement officer. My badge is on my hip. My brother is also a police officer in this town, but I'm not moving. You can come and get my badge. You can do whatever you want. And the long and short of it actually became that someone between our home and him going to and from Dunkin' Donuts called the cops because he looked suspicious with a baby in a pouch. And so my blood pressure is always up, right? And I don't mean that hyperbolically. I don't mean that to be dramatic. My blood pressure is always up because if a man is just carrying his child like any other person does to get fresh air on a nice day, and 2 cop cars roll up on him, cops come out, and he's doing nothing but carrying his daughter and having a bonding experience. Of course, I'm concerned when he wants to go jogging because there's a gentleman named Ahmaud Arbery who was shot for doing the same thing. And of course, I'm concerned when he goes to and from work, because when he is profiled in those capacities, no one knows that he's kind. No one knows that he's a doctoral candidate. No one cares that he has a family to go home to. Would he have the time to even plead his case? Would he have the time in the same, let's take it full circle. Would he have the time in the same way that the doctor said, I'm going to scream out that I'm a doctor and I save people's lives
Mhm.
in hopes that my benevolence to humanity makes my life worth saving too? I don't even know if he is capable of justifying his existence,
Mhm.
because I don't know how, and what more of a vulnerable state are you ever in than when you're with a child?
Mhm.
How do you make yourself more kind, more caring, more safe?
And what made him look suspicious?
Because he was a Black man with a child.
Yeah. And what made that suspicious?
Because the trope is, or the thought is, taking it back to what Natalie said about the media, first of all, Black fathers don't exist,
Mhm.
let alone Black fathers who are caring and kind and nurturing and actually want to spend time with their children.
And I
All
want
the things that we
that is
perpetuate in society.
that is despite some recent studies that show that Black men, when compared to white men and other ethnic groups, actually spend more hours a week with their children than the men in those other groups.
Correct.
But that is a serious distortion.
So to answer your question, and I know we're over time and I apologize, this is why I say, for my own sanity, just one tab I can close in my brain. Think of it as a computer, just one tab that's open, that's probably not even functioning well because it's been open for so long. But once I know he is where he needs to be, I can just X out that tab, even if it's for the 8, the 10, the 12 hours he's there, and then I'll open it back up when I have to. But it's for all the things and all the reasons we've already said that I do that.
Mhm.
One of the comments is, how do Black children just be children? This is so heavy.
In some ways, they don't. In some ways, I think in part, there is a reality that Black children, by the time they're a certain age, even if you don't say anything, figure something out. That they're being viewed differently, that they're being regarded differently, that something is different. And they have to absorb that. And it's a responsibility of the family to love them enough and give them as much support as possible to make it possible for them to thrive despite that. But it's there. We can't, if our children are going to stay alive, we can't socialize them not to realize you have to appreciate when you walk into a situation, your Black embodiment has the capacity to elicit certain things in certain people, that it has nothing to do with you, but that they may do things as a result that you have to manage. That's what I think is a major socializing message. And sometimes you defer and walk away because you want to stay alive.
I want to offer my endless thanks to you all. I, like Dr. Greene, am an aunt who carries very deeply the pain and the joy of my Black nieces and nephews for the very things that you have talked about here tonight. I am quivering because this is such a critical topic. And I think back on my mother, my aunt, my grandmother, and how they couldn't rest either. And so this resonates very, very deeply. And I am tremendously grateful to each and every one of you for taking the time to bring this. And I hope that therapists on this call tonight heed all that you have shared with us, and that they are prepared to listen to the stories that Black parents come in with, So thank you.
And ask. and
And
ask those
ask.
stories, because they may not always feel welcome to tell them.
And
Because
oftentimes they don't. And
Yeah.
so it is critically important to ask about that. That's why therapists who say, I don't bring up race unless the client brings it up, is really making a huge mistake, and needs to look within themselves to ask themselves why it is that you would not bring that topic up.
Well,
To
what they're saying is, it makes me anxious and I'm not going to bring this up. And that, of course, we're not there. It's not about our anxiety. It's about what is helpful to the patient.
Yes. And to those who may have had questions that we did not get to tonight, I apologize. But this has been such a rich conversation that I surely hope that perhaps you will look further into exploring and understanding this topic, and that we will look to the books when they come out from all of our panelists here, those who have books in the works. So thank you so much. And I'll give our moderator the last words.
Well, I'm in those moments in which I feel despair. And I must say, when I feel that, it is around my young nieces and nephews. And, you know, that I am auntie out of control, because my response to the idea of somebody hurting them is, that's it, you're on homeschooling and we're going to lock you up in the house until you're 30. But it is what I was given. And that's the message from people who, I think what comes to mind is something Cory Booker once said: I drink deeply from wells I never had to dig. And if people who had so much less in terms of resources than I do can say, you have to keep moving forward. You have a life, you have to live your life, and you have to keep moving forward. And that the future hasn't been written. That as an aunt of little ones who have to be able to go out in the world and have some faith that they're going to be able to do something that realizes their dreams or their ambitions, that there is a future for them, that you can't give up, that you have to keep moving forward.
Yes. Sorry, I said I was giving Dr. Greene the last word, but this is just to let people know that there is a recording and we will make it available to you as soon as it is up. We will send to the registrants the link to access, and we'll send it to you, the panelists, as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
Okay.
having us. Thank you, Dr. Greene. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr.
so much.
Greene, for organizing this. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And great to see
Thank you,
everyone
the
again.
amazing Dr.
Bye.
Greene.
Yeah, take care.
You.
Yes. Great. Have a good weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
You too.
Stay safe.